There are names in Philippine entertainment that you never forget. Names that were attached to faces you watched on television every week, voices you heard on the radio during long commutes, talents that felt like they had barely scratched the surface of what they were capable of. And then, one morning, without any warning whatsoever, you woke up to a notification on your phone or a headline scrolling across the morning news, and one of those names was gone. Just gone. Not after a long career full of graceful farewells, not in old age surrounded by grandchildren after a life fully lived, but suddenly, shockingly, and in many cases at an age when most people are still figuring out who they are and what they are capable of becoming. The Philippine entertainment industry has always carried its losses publicly and personally. There is something about the Filipino relationship with celebrity, the intimacy of it, the sense of shared ownership the audience feels toward people they watched grow up on their screens, that makes these departures feel different from celebrity grief in many other cultures. When a Filipino star is gone, it is not just a famous person who has disappeared. It is someone whose face was at the dinner table every night through the television. Someone whose voice was in the car on the way to school. Someone whose performances made people laugh at something that was actually about their own lives, or cry at something that mirrored their own losses. The decade between 2016 and 2026 carried more than its fair share of those moments. Some of the people we are going to talk about today were taken by illness, some by accidents, some by the cumulative weight of battles they were fighting quietly and alone in the spaces that public visibility never showed, and some left behind questions that have never been fully or cleanly answered, and probably never will be. This video is a tribute and a documentary in equal measure. It is not meant to sensationalize. It is not meant to speculate beyond what is verified and known. It is meant to remember these people, the real ones behind the roles and the performances and the public images, with the honesty and the care they deserve. Make absolutely sure you stay until the very end of this video, because we are going to go deeper than the headlines, and some of these stories carry context and detail that the original news coverage never fully gave these individuals. They were more than their final headlines, and they deserve to be remembered that way. Before we talk about any specific names, it is worth taking a moment to honestly understand the world these individuals lived and worked inside, because that context shapes every single story in this documentary. The Philippine entertainment industry is one of the most demanding, most visible, and in many ways most structurally unforgiving entertainment ecosystems in all of Asia. For most of this decade, the two dominant broadcast giants, ABS-CBN and GMA Network, operated on production schedules that would be considered extreme in any comparable industry anywhere in the world. It was not unusual for actors, particularly young ones under exclusive talent contracts, to work 6 and sometimes 7 days a week during peak production seasons. Teleserie production cycles ran on timelines that left virtually no room for rest between projects, and the expectation of constant availability was embedded into the professional culture in ways that were simply accepted as the price of the career. The talent contract systems of the earlier part of this decade gave networks significant control over a celebrity's public image, personal relationships, and media presence. The idea of a young performer setting their own boundaries around their time, their health, or their emotional well-being was not something the industry's traditional structure was designed to accommodate. And the broader Philippine cultural environment, the deep Catholic tradition of endurance, the premium placed on collective harmony over individual acknowledgement of struggle, the Bahala Na spirit that we have discussed in depth on this channel, sometimes made it harder, not easier, for public figures to admit that they were not okay. Mental health conversations were, for much of this decade, still deeply stigmatized in the Philippine public sphere. To admit difficulty was to risk being seen as weak or ungrateful. To seek help publicly was to risk tabloid coverage that reframed vulnerability as scandal or instability. The industry's commercial structure depended on the cultivated image of wellness and happiness, because that image was what sold the products, drove the ratings, and kept the machine running. Several of the losses covered in this documentary were shaped, directly or indirectly, by this environment. Naming that clearly before we name the individuals is not an attempt to assign blame. It is an attempt to tell the truth about the system those individuals were living and working inside. Before we reach the younger losses of this decade, it would be incomplete and frankly disrespectful to the magnitude of this period in Philippine entertainment history not to begin with the person whose passing on April 16, 2025, sent the entire country into a collective state of grief unlike anything the industry had experienced in living memory. Nora Aunor was 71 years old when she left, and by every meaningful measure, she had lived one of the most extraordinary lives in the history of Philippine culture. Born Nora Cabaltera Villamayor on May 21st, 1953, in Iriga, Camarines Sur, Nora began life as a child snack vendor at a train station, selling boiled peanuts and rice cakes to passengers to help support her family. By her late teens, she was one of the most recognizable faces in Philippine cinema. Over a career spanning nearly 6 decades, she appeared in more than 170 films, earned every significant acting award the country offers, and was proclaimed a National Artist for Film and Broadcast Arts by the Philippine government in 2022, one of the highest cultural honours the state can bestow. Her audiences called her Ate Guy, meaning Big Sister, a nickname that said everything about the relationship Filipinos felt they had with her. She was not just a star, she was family. What made Nora Aunor exceptional in the context of Philippine entertainment history was that she represented, from the very beginning of her career, something the industry's established beauty standards were not expecting. She had a darker complexion than the half-Caucasian actresses who dominated local cinema at the time she emerged. She came not from privilege, but from genuine poverty, and she became the country's biggest star anyway, not despite those things, but in the eyes of millions of ordinary Filipinos who saw themselves in her because of them. Her death, the cause of which was not publicly disclosed by her family, was met with a state funeral and a national outpouring of grief that confirmed what her career had always suggested, that she was not merely a celebrity, she was a mirror in which an entire nation had spent decades recognizing itself. Before we continue, please take a quick moment right now and hit the like button. It genuinely costs you nothing, and it helps this channel reach more people who want to see serious, respectful content about Filipino culture and history. Drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you are watching from today, whether you are in the Philippines, in Nigeria, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or anywhere else on Earth. Subscribe if you have not yet, so you never miss a video. If there is one name from this decade that represents both the extraordinary creative potential and the devastating fragility of a new generation of Filipino creators, it is Eman Nimedez. Born Emmanuel Luis Dolores Nimedez on April 3rd, 1999, in Quezon City, Eman was a self-made content creator who built a YouTube channel of nearly 3 million subscribers entirely through his own vision, humour, and work ethic. His videos, sharp, inventive parody films and short comedies that connected with young Filipinos in a way that traditional network television was increasingly struggling to do, were made not in a network studio with a production team behind them, but at home, with the resources available to any determined young person with a camera and an internet connection. His 2017 parody of the Korean drama Goblin went viral across the Philippines and became a cultural moment that earned him mainstream media attention,
crossover appearances in traditional showbiz through ABS-CBN's sitcom Love You, and recognition as one of the most genuinely creative young talents working in Philippine entertainment at the time. He was not just making content, he was demonstrating that Filipino storytelling had room and audience far beyond the boundaries of what broadcast television had always assumed were the limits of the market.
He was 21 years old when he passed away on August 16th, 2020. The timing of his passing matters enormously to anyone who wants to understand the full weight of it. August 2020 was the absolute depth of the Philippine pandemic lockdown, a period of prolonged isolation, economic uncertainty, and the kind of collective anxiety that strips away the normal social structures people rely on to manage difficulty. An entire generation of young Filipinos was confined to their homes, cut off from school, from friends, from the routines that give daily life its shape and meaning. And in the middle of all of that, the young man who had built his entire creative career on using humour to help people feel connected and less alone was suddenly gone. The grief of his community was not merely celebrity grief, it was the specific grief of losing someone who had been a companion through difficulty, and losing him at the moment when that companion was needed most. Not every loss from this decade belonged to the young, and it would misrepresent this period in Philippine entertainment to tell it only through the lens of youth cut short. Some of the most significant departures of this decade were people in the middle or later stages of careers that felt nowhere near their natural conclusion. People whose audiences had grown so accustomed to their presence that the absence felt structurally wrong, like a piece of furniture removed from a room you have known your entire life. Chocolate, the stage name of Roberto Gatchalian Jr., born in 1972, was one of the most beloved comedians in the Philippines. A fixture on ABS-CBN comedy programs for decades, known for the warmth and fearlessness of his stage presence, and for a quality of humour that was observational and inclusive rather than cutting or exclusionary. Chocolate had built the kind of career that felt permanent. He was the comedian your family watched together. He was the performer whose timing was so precise and so generous that he seemed to make everyone in the room feel personally seen by the joke. On March 9th, 2019, he was performing in Abra in northern Luzon when he collapsed after finishing his show. He had suffered a heart attack complicated by pulmonary edema. He was 46 years old. The loss was sudden in the specific way that only the loss of someone still fully active can be. Not the death you brace for when someone has been visibly ill, but the kind that arrives between one ordinary moment and the next, while the person was still doing the thing they were born to do. Susan Roses passed away on May 20th, 2022, at the age of 80, following a sudden cardiopulmonary arrest. She had been a working actress for 70 years. Her final role, as Lola Flora, the beloved grandmother figure in Ang Provinciano, the longest-running drama in Philippine television history, had kept her active and present in Filipino living rooms until almost the very end. She was the widow of Fernando Poe Jr., the beloved action star who had run for the Philippine presidency in 2004, and she had carried that legacy with remarkable dignity and grace. To lose Susan Roses was to lose one of the last living connections to the golden age of Philippine cinema, and to lose her while she was still working, still contributing, still present, made the absence sharper. Two of the losses that demanded the most from the Philippine entertainment industry in terms of honest self-examination were those of Sherry Gill and J.M. Canlas, two people at entirely opposite ends of the career spectrum, whose departures forced a reckoning with different and equally important dimensions of what the industry was not doing well enough. Sherry Gill was 59 years old when she passed away on August the 5th, 2022, in New York City, after a private battle with a rare form of endometrial cancer that she had kept almost entirely from public view. Diagnosed in October 2021, she had made the decision to end her showbiz career in February 2022, selling her belongings, shaving her head as a symbol of personal renewal, and relocating to New York to be with her children and to receive treatment at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. The public had almost no indication of how serious her illness was until the news of her death arrived. In its own way, that private courage was entirely consistent with the person Sherry Gill had always been, on screen and off. Born Evangeline Rose Gill Eigenmann into a dynasty of Philippine entertainment royalty, the daughter of actors Rosemarie Gill and Eddie Mesa, the sister of actor Mark Gill, who had himself passed from liver cancer in 2014, Sherry had carried the full weight of that lineage and exceeded it. Dubbed La Primera Contravida, meaning the prime villain, across a career of nearly 50 years, she had appeared in over 120 films and collected every major acting award the Philippines offers, multiple times. She won Best Actress at the ASEAN International Film Awards in 2015 and Best Lead Actress in a Foreign Language Film at the Madrid International Film Festival the same year. And she delivered in the 1985 film Bituin Walang Ningning, opposite Sharon Cuneta, what remains one of the most quoted lines in the entire history of Philippine cinema. "You are nothing but a second-rate, trying hard copycat." That line is iconic, not because it was written brilliantly, but because she delivered it with a precision and a controlled ferocity that made it feel genuinely dangerous. That was what Sherry Gill did. She made every scene feel like something was genuinely at stake. Then there is J.M. Canlas, who was only 17 years old when he passed away on August 3rd, 2023. The youngest brother of prominent Filipino actors Elijah and Jerome Canlas, J.M. had already appeared in the award-winning indie films Kiko Boxingero and Ani, as well as the television series Unconditional. His family described him publicly as a talented actor, athlete, musician, singer, debater and gamer, not as a list of accomplishments, but as the portrait of a young person who was fully alive and fully engaged with the world in every direction at once. His death came from a place of private struggle that the public did not see coming, and the response from the Filipino entertainment community was immediate and raw. For an industry that had spent decades treating mental health as a private matter, something to be managed quietly rather than addressed structurally, the loss of a 17-year-old with that much visible potential and that much invisible pain forced a conversation that could not be deferred any longer. Young actors, broadcasters, and digital creators began speaking publicly about their own struggles in the weeks after JM's passing, in a way that had never happened before at that scale. The final years of this decade brought losses that, taken together, sent a signal so consistent that it demanded to be heard. In October 2025, two names entered the public conversation in quick succession. One, a 38-year-old singer-songwriter, the other, a 19-year-old content creator. And both of their stories, in very different ways, asked the same underlying question. What is the entertainment industry and the culture around it doing to protect the people it depends on? Davy Langit was 38 years old when he passed away on October 21st, 2025. A singer-songwriter who had risen to recognition during the first season of Pinoy Dream Academy alongside Yeng Constantino, whose eventual win in that competition became one of the most celebrated moments in Philippine talent show history. Davy had built a body of original work that included compositions like Wedding Song and Selfie Song, songs that connected with Filipino audiences with the specific warmth that comes from music written by someone who is trying honestly to communicate something, rather than simply trying to be heard. He was diagnosed in August 2025 with a rare spinal infection,
that affected his back and his ability to walk, and the speed of the deterioration, from diagnosis to death in less than 3 months, was devastating. The music community in the Philippines mourned him with the kind of grief reserved for people whose best work you genuinely believed was still ahead of them. 38 is not old. It is not even the middle. And the songs he had not yet written were part of what the country was grieving. And then there was Emin Atienza, 19 years old. The daughter of television presenter Kim Atienza and Felicia Hung Atienza. A content creator, a mental health advocate, and a young woman who had used her platform with a maturity and courage that left most adults considerably older than her looking in a mirror. She had spoken openly about living with post-traumatic stress disorder and bipolar disorder. She had used social media not as a tool for performing happiness, but as a space for genuine, uncomfortable honesty about what it felt like to navigate mental health challenges in public. She was studying in Los Angeles when she passed away on October 22nd, 2025. She was 19 years old. The statement her parents released captured something that this entire decade had been slowly building toward, and that the industry and the culture had been slowly, painfully learning to say out loud. They wrote that Emin had a way of making people feel seen and heard, that she was not afraid to share her own journey with mental health, and that her authenticity helped so many feel less alone. They asked the people who loved her to carry forward compassion, courage, and a little extra kindness. For a culture that has historically celebrated endurance over acknowledgement, that message, issued in the immediate aftermath of loss by a family navigating the worst thing a family can navigate, was both a tribute and a challenge to the world their daughter had tried to make more honest. The deaths covered in this documentary do not form a single clean pattern. They came from illness and from accident, from the specific pressures of public life, and from battles fought privately in spaces the public never reached. Some were sudden and some were prolonged. Some carried unanswered questions, and some were transparent in a way that made the grief no easier to carry, but at least honest in its shape. What they share is not a cause. What they share is belonging to a single decade in the life of an industry and a culture that was being asked over and over again to look more honestly at itself. And there are signs that it has begun to. Mental health conversations that were effectively unspeakable in Philippine public life at the start of this decade are now, partly because of the people this documentary has covered, spoken about with increasing frequency and with something approaching genuine institutional seriousness. Young digital creators like Emin Nimedez demonstrated before his death that an entirely new generation of Filipino storytelling was possible outside the network system, and that generation has continued to grow and to build, in part as a tribute to what he started. The losses of Sherry Gill, Susan Roses and Nora Aunor within a 4-year window between 2022 and 2025 marked the end of a particular era in Philippine cinema, with a finality that no anniversary documentary or retrospective could have manufactured. And the response from the Filipino public showed that the connection between audiences and the artists who shaped their cultural identity.
Subscriber counts. These people mattered. They mattered to their families and their friends and their communities in the way that all people matter. Completely, irreplaceably, and in ways that the public version of their lives only partially reflected. But they also mattered to millions of Filipinos who watched them and listened to them and found in their work something that reflected the texture of ordinary Filipino life, with warmth and honesty, and sometimes with a courage that went mostly unacknowledged while they were still here. The very least we can do is remember them with the same honesty and the same care
that the best of them brought to everything they made. Thank you for watching this documentary all the way through. If it moved you, if it made you think, if it gave you something to carry with you, please share it. Leave a comment. Tell us who you would want us to remember next. We will see you in the next one.